In your book, we actually have the story of Benjamin Franklin at the First Continental Congress, the problems that were happening before, the lack of unity, the fact that we were never going to get a constitution, and then Mr. Benjamin Franklin, who is notoriously not a believer, supposedly, gets up and says this.
It's on page 113, by the way. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understandings? In the beginning of the contest with Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayers in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that, quote, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests, our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers, imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings upon our deliberations, be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of the city be requested to officiate in that service.
Excellent. And as you know from the movie, or hopefully you know from reading the book, that did happen eventually, and we were able to be unified, and it was pretty amazing because we did end up with a constitution, and several of the presidents talked about how it was nothing short of miraculous or very close to a miracle because it just wasn't going to happen. Okay, some good news. We've been talking about things that have been happening hundreds of years ago, and it's probably easy to think, yeah, but now things are really different. Now people don't love the Lord. Now we're going away from God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in some cases that is very, very true, but it's not completely true. And I could give you lots and lots of examples, but that's going to wait for another couple weeks till we get to the 1900s. But I did want to tell you two things that literally happened this week that I just kept thinking, God's not done with our nation, and there's hope for our nation yet. The first one is in the war against Iran, as people say in America, where there were two pilots who got shot down behind enemy lines. One was rescued and the other one was not. He was stuck for over 24 hours with nothing but a pistol, climbing through the mountains while the enemy was looking for him, wanting to kill him, and he was kind of on his own and he was wounded. And the CIA was able to track him, and when they finally got first contact with this guy, his first message back to them was God is good before he was rescued. That tells you something. Second one, there's a guy up there hanging around on the other side of the moon right now. There's actually 4 of them who went up in a spaceship, Artemis 2, and it's a big deal because it's like the first something and the first something and the first something person, which the news loves to go on about. It's the first Canadian. I'm not sure why he's in our group, but the first African American who's gone to the moon. Yay! Now, there have been several African American people up in space, 16 or 17 of them, I believe. So it's really not this like life-changing big deal, but people are making a big deal out of it. And of course, people, when they're asking him about it, it's like, oh, how does it feel being the first step, trying to make it about race? Like, yay, we need more of these, and, we've been oppressed, and so I'm going to represent blah, blah, blah. He's not doing any of that. He's like, I just want you to know. He's like, it's nice that young black and brown kids can look at me and say, hey, he can do that, I can do that too. He's like, there's a woman on board. And he's like, it's nice that girls can look at her and say, yeah, I can do that too, but it's not really what it's about. In the end, it's about the human race and the human experience. It was actually really cool. But this man is a strong believer, which is, I think, one of the reasons he's not in the news all over the place, because they keep asking him questions and he talks about God. So right before they went on the other side of the moon, before they lost contact with Earth, maybe their last message kind of thing, he gave an Easter message, basically talked about God, talked about the law of loving your neighbor and love, and he talked about creation, and he's talked about Christ. He's been a very open, and he's used his platform and his gifts and his abilities and his talents to share the gospel with people, which is really cool. Oh, and by the way, that guy that got rescued in the whole God is Good thing, he got rescued on Easter. That was pretty cool too. Okay, so good news. God's not done with us yet. There's good things that are happening all the time. The news probably won't tell you very much about it, but if you start to learn the right places to look, you'll find them. They're there. Okay, at this point, we got our freedom. Now what? So you get out from under tyranny, and now you have to try to create a government. We weren't the only ones to get that far. In fact, there are, I think, over 100 countries around the world that fought to gain independence from Britain. There are more people with Independence Days from Britain than there are any other country in the world, because Britain kind of wanted to take over everything. The ways of England are the ways of the world, they used to say. So, it didn't always work for everybody. France, for example, had a revolution not long after we did, and it didn't turn out so well. Thomas Jefferson was all about it. He thought it was exciting because he thought it was, like ours. Yay, they'll do it too, and then they'll be free. But they didn't have the same core at their base to create a government, to build a country and a culture. They weren't doing it for the same reasons, and so it floundered. There was a lot of corruption. It wasn't good. And that happened with a lot of countries. They didn't have what they needed to be able to build a nation that was going to last and be strong and be moral and good. As if you look down, we'll get to that. Okay, I'm going to read through this, and I'm going to give you the answers to go in your blanks. Most of it's just stuff I wanted to talk through so that you have it, and so that you understand once we got freedom, that wasn't the end of it. We had to figure out, how are we going to build our nation? And a lot of our principles came from things all the way back from like the Mayflower Compact and different things like that. Soul Liberty, which we haven't read about. Whoever got the comics for the whole entire America, which is so good. Everybody should borrow that one. That's in there. The guy who started Rhode Island. And Soul Liberty, which is basically the freedom to believe what you want to believe, which we'll get to on page 2. Okay, so we talked about the Constitutional Convention, which was what the Great Awakening movie was about, and how it was not working. People weren't unified. The states weren't unified. They're like, this is what we care about. And other people are like, this is what we care about. Slavery was a huge issue and a lot of contention there. There was not going to be unity. We were not going to have a nation. Whew! And then Benjamin Franklin gets up and talks about, wait a second, we were turning to God when we desperately needed him for the war. Why aren't we doing that now? Benjamin Franklin, the one they're always saying, hey, we're not a Christian nation because, Benjamin Franklin. So they did. They went and prayed. They asked God's help. They came back. And about 5 days later, I believe, is when we had a constitution. And what people said about it, I wanted you to have this in your notes so that you have evidence for people giving God credit for that. So for starters, first quote. As the primary author, he wrote to Jefferson that, quote, the degree of concord, so the degree of agreement, which ultimately prevailed was no less than a miracle. That was James Madison. He's the one who wrote the Constitution, as in literally handwriting it like you're writing notes now. And I think he's the one who came up with the words, I'm not sure. Okay, next one. He wrote to Lafayette that the unity of different states on a national government was, quote, little short of a miracle.
Washington?
That was George Washington, yes. He and Lafayette were pretty close. It's fun. The next one. Described the final document as a system which, quote, without the finger of God, could never have been agreed on. That was Alexander Hamilton. Hey, Grace, welcome.
That's a long name.
Can you grab her the last set? I'm not sure where it is. Okay, the last one is a whole entire quote. I wanted you to have it. I do not believe that the Constitution was the offspring of inspiration, as in, this isn't the Bible, y'all. It's not divinely inspired, as in God gave us all the words. But I am as perfectly satisfied that the union of the states in its form and adoption is as much the work of a divine providence as any of the miracles recorded in the Old and New Testaments were the effects of a divine power. As in, God had his hand on this nation. God had a hand on us getting together and unifying and creating this world. That was Benjamin Rush. And then underneath, John Adams, who was going to become the second president, said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Never mind, Hope. I'll give her mine. Can you grab the president one, though? She'll need that. Okay, So we are down in the second section after the highlights. Now, when they were creating the structure of our government, what are our laws going to be? How is it going to be set up? There is biblical support for a lot of the ways that made our actual country. So, for example, the three, that's Benjamin Rush, the three distinct branches of government. That comes from Isaiah 33:22. So you can write Isaiah or you can write IS period if you know how those work. The separation of powers, which if you don't know what that means, you can look it up later. That comes from Jeremiah 17:9. The exemption of taxes for churches. So churches shouldn't have to pay taxes, which is great. Ezra 7:24. Ezra was a lawyer, by the way, if you didn't know. Ezra made up his mind, there's a verse about it, to keep the law of God and to declare in Israel statutes and judgments. To know the law, to keep the law, and to teach it. Legal immigration, Leviticus 19:34. The president should be a natural-born citizen, which means he should be born in America. That comes from Deuteronomy 17:15. And if you want the abbreviation, that's DEUT, period. And having witnesses and capital punishment comes from Deuteronomy 17:6. Deuteronomy being the book of the law. You'll notice quite a few of these come from the books of the law because the way God set up the system was good. Washington said religious causes were the reason Americans elected their own leaders. So not having a monarch, not just whoever's got the most money or the biggest mansion.
That one is George Washington.
It's whoever the people vote for, we the people. And I wanted to show you the thing on the bottom, the exception clause, which is Article 3. Now we're getting into what they call the weeds. Now we're getting into super details. If you're going to be a lawyer, you'll know all this stuff. But this one I thought was important because we hear different things, basically about things that are happening right now in our culture today. Article 3 says that the court can deal with, so in other words, a court with a judge can deal with anything except what Congress chooses to make a law about. So in other words, if Congress says it's okay to pray after a football game, no judge in the country should be able to make a law punishing somebody for doing it or saying they can't do it or anything like that. That's the way our law is supposed to be set up. Now, at this point, you know that things are happening in our country that don't fit according to the original intention of the law. So, for example, say somebody prays after a football game and somebody gets offended about it because they are a Hindu or an atheist or whatever, and they're like, no, this isn't right, I don't like it. And so they go to some judge and they sue them or whatever, and the judge says, oh, that's unconstitutional, separation of church and state or whatever. It's like, actually, no. But to make everybody stop doing something because one person is offended, that's not justice, that's bias. Write that in your thing. That's not justice, that's bias. To make the whole stop doing something for one or two or three people who are upset about it, just because they yell and fight and whine, that's not justice, that's bias. The consent of the governed is that the majority vote wins as long as it is just. Next blank. As long as it is just, as in right and wrong. So the majority shouldn't win if the majority wants to go cut off somebody's head for no good reason. That's not right and wrong. We have laws about that. But if there's no law about it, then we have a vote. If we vote for Bob and 77 people voted for Bob and one person doesn't like Bob, and they're like, wham, 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 I'm offended about it, we don't change the law because the one person's upset. That's how our law system works. Now, if you were in other countries where Bob was the king, or Bob had a friend who was the king, and they were like, nobody voted for Bob, nobody wants Bob, Bob's a terrible, terrible person, he likes to cut off his wife's heads, but he's like, I'm the king anyway, I'll cut off your head too. That's not just. We all know that. That's not just. That's not even biased. That's just really bad. Okay, next page. Separation of church and state. The reason we are sitting in a circle today, which is not a circle, this is a shape that would be oblong, oval, yeah,
Oval.
something of the kind.
Into it.
It's because I wanted to actually give you a chance to think through this and talk through this. Separation of church and state. Something we have heard about forever that has been misused for a very long time. It is literally brought up by people in the news, by people in the courts, by people all over the country when they want to stop Christians from doing things. Separation of church and state. You shouldn't be allowed to pray in Congress, which is literally what all of them did in Congress. Benjamin Franklin, all that. You shouldn't be able to, because church and state. The founding fathers, that's what they did, was separation of church and state, and so it's not okay. You shouldn't be able to make laws that benefit Christians. It should always be against the Christians. Separation of church and state. You shouldn't have the Ten Commandments in any building, even though they made the buildings with the Ten Commandments in them, because of separation of church and state. Okay, let me give you a scenario. Let's bring this down to our situation. Here you are at the Philadelphia Homeschool Fellowship. Mr. Riffle is running game time. There's this kid. We'll name him Jerk. That's his name. His mother didn't like him from the beginning. Okay, his name is Jerk. We'll call him James. James the Jerk. James the Jerk loves to boss everybody around. You've probably all known someone like this. And so during game time, Mr. Riffle's got his megaphone, and he's trying to tell people what to do. And James the Jerk is always like, as soon as he says something, he goes around telling everybody the same thing, or he tells them more what to do. And they start the game, and he's like fussing at everybody and kicking people out, all the things. He's doing things, and everybody's like, ugh, you're just making it no fun, right? So finally, Mr. Riffle's like, this is not okay. And he's like, hey, James the Jerk, come on over here. And he's like, sit there, hold the megaphone. That's your job. And everybody's just like, oh, that's so nice. Can you give me a heads up when it's 2:15? That's
2:15.
No! It's James's fault. Okay. Everybody's like, that's so nice. He's finally going to stop bossing everybody around, right? Everybody knows that the reason Mr. Riffle called him over here was to get him to stop bossing everybody around, right? Okay, well, Mr. Riffle has to go on a trip. And somebody else comes in charge. And James says, well, Mr. Riffle told me to stand here with the megaphone. And then the third time somebody comes in, they're like, Mr. Riffle told me to stand here with the megaphone. So he starts using the megaphone. Hey, blah, 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 blah. And he starts, what does he start doing? Bossing everybody around with the megaphone. And now everybody's like, oh, no. But every time somebody says something about it, he's like, Mr. Riffle told me to stand here with the megaphone. And after a while, who's everybody mad at?
Mr. Riffle.
Mr. Riffle. Is it Mr. Riffle's fault? No. So all the original people who were there that day are like, that is not why he did that. He did it for the exact opposite reason, but somebody's twisted it for their own purposes. That is what's happening with separation of church and state. It was intended, the whole point of it, so write fast, because you got to go change clothes. The intention was to keep government from messing with the church, either forcing one church or one religion, as in, if you aren't a Muslim, we're going to kill you. As in, if you aren't a Christian, we're going to kill you, which is what Constantine was all about. As if you are not in the Church of England, we're going to kill you. As if you're not a Roman Catholic, we're going to kill you. Do you see kind of a theme here? Or stopping a certain church or religion. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to kill you. That's what separation of church and state was about, was that the government wasn't a church, a certain church group forcing their beliefs on everybody else. That was the point. And it's clear in 1789 records, which you have the internet, it's accessible, you can go dig it out yourself. It's there. It's not to have any one denomination or group ruling the nation. And if you think, well, like, no duh, there are nations around the world that are literally doing that right now. That's why we have the persecuted church. Because if you live in a communist country, if you live in a Muslim country, if you live in some of the other countries where it's illegal to be a Christian, that's why they have underground churches. Because if they find out, you're going to get imprisoned, you might get tortured, you might get killed. It's still happening today. Our country does not have that because of the founding documents. Okay, you can't limit religious gatherings. Now that, again, seems like a no-duh. But you all lived through COVID, so you know it's not a no-duh. People were getting upset when they started saying not more than this many people can meet for church. You're like, whoa, Constitution, Constitution, Constitution. They're like, well, this is a special occasion. This is an emergency. This is a whatever. Same thing happened in the Spanish flu back in 1918. They did the same thing, and the church got upset about it then, too. Because it's like, whoa, infringement of rights. We have the right to be able to meet. But that's one of the things the Nazis did. You can't meet more than 5 people. That's one of the things the communists like to do. You can't meet in big groups, because if you can't ever get together, how are you going to start a revolution? How are you going to say, wait a second, this isn't right? How are you going to say, wait a second, we have rights, let's do something about it? You can't do that if there's only like 2 or 3 of you, unless you're like Robin Hood. Even he had to get a group. Okay. In other words, my personal beliefs are none of the government's business. Thank you very much. And why do we know this for sure? Example was the Baptists. Go Baptists! They brought it up to Thomas Jefferson, who was not a Baptist. And they were concerned because you remember, well, the Baptists, they became Baptists because of persecution by another group, just like the Huguenots and the other ones. And so they're like, is America going to become the Anglican Church now? Is it going to become this? Is it going to be that? Are we going to start getting persecuted here? And that's, to be honest, it started happening. Anytime you have a really strong group of believers, the Puritans started pressuring other people who weren't Puritans. The Quakers wanted to pressure other people who weren't Quakers. They only wanted the people in office to be the people who believed the way they did. And again, it's human nature. And so you have to have laws that help you. And Thomas Jefferson assured them, don't worry, we have a wall between the church and the state. The reason he said that was not so you Baptists can't ever worship. It was so that you could. It was to protect the church. Not to stamp it down. It's been twisted at this point, which is why it's good to read, write, and know how your government works, so that you know when your rights are being infringed, so that you know when things aren't as they should be, so you can raise your kids and teach them and help them understand the truth. So there, James the Jerk, give me the megaphone back. Go home. We have to stop for there. We'll get to the rest of this next week. But your challenge this week, I'll sit down and say it so that Rachel can hear it. Your challenge. I'm going to give you those 4 pages that you had just now, and you got 23 points. You are taking them home. You are able to answer as many as you can. You will get 20 points per answer. So 20 points times 50 is how many? Math people.
About 1,000.
It's exactly 1,000. So if you get them all right, that's 1,000 points, equal to reading an entire book. So go home, you look up your stuff, ask people. You can ask your parents, you can ask your friends, you can ask other students. The only thing you are not allowed to do is look it up on the internet. No internet. You can go to the library. Ask the librarian. Ask random people on the street. See what they know. It'd be interesting. Yeah. Okay. Don't ask James the Jerk. He will give you the wrong answer. But you can ask Pastor Ripple. He might know. Okay. So find out as much as you can and come back next week with your answers and get more points. Your other challenge, I'm going to hand it to you, and I want you to write down, because I didn't make you a challenge sheet because we're not doing a ton, just these. So everybody take one, and then right on the top, I want you to read 44 to 50 in your 100 verses, and that will be 300 points this week. I'm also going to send you videos, very interesting videos about slavery and the abolition movement and interesting stuff like that. That's 300 points. And then, of course, this, if you get them all correct, that's 1,000 points, plus your books. So you can get yourself 3,000 points this week. We're getting close to the end. Okay, the number is 44 to 50. We're spreading them out because we're running out of time. And if you didn't get your books, you can get your books, and everybody else go change real quick. And I will see you later.